Well, welcome back to the Mid-Norfolk Garden, and we're going to show you today a couple of flowering red currants, or flowering currants as they're sometimes called, Ribes sanguineum, the flowering currant, which is doing its very best here in Norfolk right now in mid-April this year. They're really quite early flowering, these. They come out a couple of weeks after the flowering plums are finished, but well before some of the later flowering spring trees such as the apples or the crabs. They're out the same time as the magnolias really, and forsythia should be flowering at around the same time. Now this one is a mid-coloured one. They come in a variety of different shades of pink. There's also a white variety. The darkest one's usually a variety called King Edward VII. Don't think this is quite as dark. We've got one at Blakeney which is an absolute beauty, but just look at the amount of flower that's being produced in here. It's 7:30 in the morning I'm filming this, and the bees are already enjoying the pollen on this. Now as you can see on this stem, the flowers are held in little drifts, each one containing 20 or 30 flowers on a stem extending downwards around 3 inches, and it's last year's growth that has the majority of the flower bud on it. There are along the older stems of last year's growth where the buds are broken also some flowering things, but the majority of the colour on this is on the previous year's growth. Now if you can plant these and just leave them without pruning, then you'll get the most flower from them. But the time to actually prune these is immediately after flowering. If you do need to do any reshaping, is to remove the flowering stems as they've finished, cut back to shape your bush to the size and shape that you require if it's in a position that requires that. But mostly the advice is to leave these well alone and let them form a clump or bush, which will be somewhere between 2 and 3, possibly 4 meters tall. And if you can do that and leave them untouched, they'll give you this marvellous flash of colour. Let's go and have a look at another one. We've got a slightly different, darker colour one just down the way I'm going to show you next. Now this one has been in exactly the same amount of time as the previous bush, but it's much smaller. You can see the quite strong upright growth at the back here, but it's growing on the western aspect of a quite large lilac that is dominating it somewhat. You can see the buds coming on that lilac. It's not going to be out and flowering for probably another week to a fortnight before that's fully out. This is a much paler colour. It's almost over this one, so there is a little variety in their flowering period. This is a native North American shrub that grows very well in Europe. It prefers a sort of open, sandy, well-drained soil and a full sun position, so this one's struggling a little bit here because of the shade that it's afforded, but by midday this should be in full sun. The other problem for this one is that it's crowded in between the large fig tree that grows on the eastern aspect of this old barn, and that, when the leaf is out again, dominates this poor ribes, so it really is doing its best, still flowering very, very well, but struggling a little bit due to the lack of light in this position. Got one more example we're going to show you on this video, which is the golden leafed variety, which we're struggling with to grow here in Norfolk. Here we are, this is the golden variety. This plant has been in this position for almost 8 years now and really has struggled just to hold its own. It's in mid position in probably a 12-foot deep herbaceous border, backed by roses and in front by quite vigorous herbaceous, so it doesn't get much light later in the season, although at this time of year you can see it in full sun. But really this plant is weakened by the, I suspect, virus infection that's been introduced to give it this golden yellow leaf form. Lack of chloroform in the leaf really does reduce its vigour, and it's not a pretty or handsome looking plant. And the amount of flower, as you can see, although it's pretty enough, the bracts are small and there's very little of it. So not a variety I could really recommend to you from the experience we've had here, I'm sure some of you will manage to grow this far better in a better position in a better soil. Another plant in the same border, just literally 10 feet away from the golden leafed one. Again, not really thriving as much as the ones in full sun due to the overhanging large copper beech, which at this time of year allows the light to come through, but you can see this plant is very much one-sided, trying to reach out to the light. You'll see on this the seed pods starting to form. Just get that in focus. These plants will seed themselves quite vigorously. Small little seedlings with the characteristic blackcurrant leaf, quite easy to spot when they do form, but the easiest way of propagating these is by hardwood cuttings. Anybody that's grown currants will know if you cut a branch of hardwood off these as a prune, stick it in the ground, chances are it's going to root and grow away, and you can do that very easily with these. This is a lovely deep red one, probably King Edward VIIth. There are multiple new varieties of this, and the deep reds really are spectacular. It's a matter of preference. The pale pinks are just as lovely. I haven't grown a white, which might be worthwhile looking out for, particularly when we're thinking of planting a pink and white garden. These are definitely something to consider. This one's growing further down towards the west aspect of this long back border. Again, it's confined between a rather large buddleia, which we cut back periodically but not every year, and on the other side a very large and vigorous shrub and climbing roses on the back. But this is flowering beautifully. Now these plants are beautifully scented. Some people love it, other people despise the scent of it, picking up a cat's urine scent, that's how it's described. I don't get that, I get the more floral tones, but I think that is a personal preference or setting as to whether you love the scent of this as a cut flower and can tolerate it being brought into the house. They're certainly spectacular as a cut flower display, and that's another great way of pruning these plants, to actually cut the branches back at this time of year, let it grow away during the summer, and the new season's growth will be your flowers for the following season. So flowering currants, well worth growing, beautiful flowering shrubs, giving you these spectacular displays, usually in England around mid-April.